Greetings and salutations, friends, and welcome back to the Horus Heresy lore breakdown, continuing on with the first Heretic. The Emperor has arrived, and he is now in a bit of a difficult position. He has to explain to Lorgar in a way that he would understand why the Emperor was not a god, why he had blasted Monarchia into smithereens, and why it was imperative that he abandon his current ways, and align himself once again with the imperial truth, and reject any and all forms of religion. So what long thought out and well-planned words did the Emperor have for Lorgar? Well, not much, to be entirely honest, although it starts with a rather interesting thing. Immediately upon arriving on the planet's surface, the Emperor orders the word-bearers to kneel, and he does so with the full force of his psychic might. He de facto forces them to their knees rather than requests or orders them to. This is a surprisingly aggressive action on behalf of the Emperor, especially as on several occasions he has seemingly been attempting to de-escalate the situation. This is, well, again, the exact opposite. This is a very clear-cut escalation, a humiliation of the word-bearers, especially as the Ultramarines, who also fell to their knees upon the Emperor's arrival, are immediately allowed to regain their footing, leaving only the word-bearers left kneeling. And unsurprisingly, the word-bearers sees this as the insult it is. Argyltal's initial reaction upon being forced to kneel was that this was not worship, this was not fealty, this was servitude. And he's not wrong. They are not doing this willingly, they are not doing this voluntarily, they are quite literally being made to do this. It is such an overtly aggressive move on behalf of the Emperor that I feel like maybe all of the other times when he seemed to be attempting to de-escalate was just my wishful thinking, and in reality, the appearance of de-escalation was entirely accidental. And the worst part is that this could have been an excellent point. Imagine that when the Emperor forced the word-bearers to kneel, he also sent them a psychic message, something along the lines of, "Is this what you wanted? To be made to kneel? To be forced into abject servitude to a power you do not understand and cannot resist? I did not wish for this. I wanted to build an imperium of man, not of God. And yet you, my sons, have forced millions into the very same state of servitude you now find yourself in. For make no mistake, my sons, by creating an entity, a god, that by virtue of its very existence is defined to be above you, there is no option but slavery. So choose now, to rise as citizens of the Imperium of Man, or remain forever on your knees, enslaved to mere power." Thusly turning the act of forcing the word-bearers to kneel into a demonstration, a lesson, a warning of what would inevitably happen to them if they were to continue down this path. For the Emperor, of course, knew of the Chaos Gods, and how they like to treat their loyal servants. But, of course, he also could not reveal this to the word-bearers. He was keeping the existence of the Chaos Gods a secret, for good reasons as well. Remember, there is power within the warp, undoubtedly so, and if there is one thing that humanity has always been somewhat weak around, it is power. For remember the old saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it was necessary to verbalize this, to explain it to the word-bearers, because, again, they don't know about chaos, at the very least nowhere near to the same extent as the Emperor. They do not know where this path leads, and they clearly have not been adequately schooled on it. Otherwise, you'd think they'd choose a different path. Therefore, merely forcing them to kneel, chastising them, and humiliating them without properly explaining why you are taking such drastic measures is not only pointless, it is counterproductive. It's like water bottling a dog 30 minutes after it's shat on the carpet. Not only is this not going to prevent the dog from shitting on the carpet again, it is also going to result in a very, very confused canine. And as we've gone over on multiple occasions now, confused humans tend to turn into angry humans. And, unfortunately, this isn't the only missed opportunity. The Emperor seems to have made no real preparations for this whatsoever, really. Lorgar keeps stating that the Emperor is a god, regardless of what he says, and again it is entirely predicated on his power, essentially quoting his quote from the beginning of the book at the Emperor, and stating that he will not be silenced just because the Emperor doesn't like being called a god. And all the Emperor really responds to this with is, no, I'm not a god. Reducing the entire conversation is to, yeah, nuh-uh, yeah, nuh-uh. Less than productive. And it is very clear that this is starting to annoy the Emperor greatly. But he doesn't argue. That's the problem. He doesn't try and convince Lorgar at any point. He simply states, no, I am not a god. When Lorgar says, this is your Imperium, he says, no, this is not my Imperium. This is the Imperium of man. Maybe it is entirely possible that the Emperor and Lorgar, which have undoubtedly had this conversation before, maybe it is possible that the Emperor has simply just given up on explaining things to Lorgar. That he sees that as a waste of time and futile. For Lorgar not only can't see, he will not see. And therefore the Emperor has moved on from attempting to argue with Lorgar to attempt to flat out order him to stop, as a measure of last resort. A loud, unequivocal, unmistakable order to cease and desist, punctuated, quite thoroughly so, with the destruction of Monarchia. At least that would be the most charitable interpretation of what's happening, but again, there was no lead-up to this. We know that the Emperor and Lorgar have talked previously, and considering Lorgar's rather unique ideas, it also seems pretty clear that they must have talked about this previously. And with the Emperor's decree against religion, a fairly clear, no, stop it, to the word-bearers, it seems inconceivable that this hasn't been attempted before, but the book gives no hint of it. And so the Emperor comes off as incredibly unreasonable, as if this is something he just dropped on the word-bearers with absolutely no prelude or attempted diplomacy earlier. He just decided to go from ignoring the fact that the word-bearers were openly worshipping him, not like they were making a secret out of it, to blowing up one of their cities, forcing the entire legion to kneel in the dust of said city, whilst also humiliating them in front of the Ultramarines. 0 to 60 is not even close. 0 to Jupiter in about 5 seconds is more like it. And it doesn't even end there. It may sound unbelievable, but it is in fact possible for the Emperor to be an even bigger brown hole than he already has been, dumping all of this upon the apparently completely unprepared word-bearers. After his denouncement of their religious ways, he then goes on to say that they alone amongst all the legions have failed him. Their conquests are the slowest, and having raised religious societies that must now be reforged, all of their efforts so far have been in vain. He not only rejects the word-bearers' worship of him, he rejects everything they have done in his service up until this point. every conquest, every sacrifice, every brother fallen, the Emperor has rejected them all. This, as you can imagine, is hard news for a legion to hear. And then, as if to crown the whole assholishness, the Emperor simply just disappears, teleported back into orbit, leaving what is left of the humiliation to rebuke Guilliman. I am hard-pressed to find any way the Emperor could have approached this worse, honestly, or in a harsher manner. To return to the whole dog shitting on the carpet analogy, this wasn't merely spraying the dog with a little spray bottle, psh psh, bad dog. This is more along the lines of putting the dog in a bag, weighing the bag down with weights, and then tossing the dog off the Niagara Falls. And all of this, of course, is made all the worse because in this book there is no reason given for any of this. There is no build-up, no explanation, no reasoning whatsoever. The Emperor just decided to do this because fuck the wordbearers, basically. Small wonder that a lot of people read this and feel like Lorgar was unfairly forced into choosing chaos, because the entire lead-up in this book is essentially Emperor, big bad bully, Lorgar, small confused innocent wabbit getting kicked around a lot. As far as Origins stories goes, this is one of the more unreasonably cruel ones I've seen in a while. I mean, it's not quite Mahou Shoujo Site manga levels of cruel and unusual, but it's not that far away from it. And, again, of course, this wasn't even the end of it. No, not even this, because when the Emperor left, he left it up to rebuke Guilliman to inform Lorgar that not only was the Legion expected to now go back and fix every single planet that they had ever conquered, and then redouble their pace of conquest in the future, but they would also be given a nice complimentary escort of Adeptus Custodes watchdogs, just to make sure that they weren't fucking around any further. Big, golden babysitters. Babysitters with the authority to potentially wipe out the entire bloody legion if it doesn't behave itself. Oh me oh my. Lorgar, losing his patience again, smacks Guilliman this time, because Lorgar insists that he saw some form of amusement in Guilliman's eyes, and that's why he hit him with Illuminarum to the point of cracking his breastplate open. Guilliman, meanwhile, simply just picks himself back up again and asks if Lorgar is done with his tantrum yet. And honestly, I somewhat doubt Lorgar's perceptiveness, shall we say. We will have a wonderful example of just how lacking his perception may be in the next chapter, in fact, but I do not believe that Guilliman took any real pleasure in this. I don't think Guilliman liked Lorgar, most certainly not. I don't think he liked his ideas, how he operated. And he certainly would not have appreciated the religious aspect of the Wordbearers. But I also do not think that Guilliman could ever truly take any pleasure of seeing a legion humiliated like this. Especially because Guilliman is more deeply attached to the Imperium than anyone else, in how it is run, how it operates, and how it functions. And so he, more than anyone, would have been completely and utterly aware of what would be the next step if Lorgar did not take this lesson to heart. And I find it very difficult to imagine Guilliman ever truly cheering on the potential destruction of another loyal legion. And on that note, something else quite interesting happened. The reaction of Argel Tal when Lorgar struck Guilliman. Again, as you can imagine, that was a bit of a shock to everybody involved. Lorgar basically killing an old man nobody could really care too much about. But smacking Guilliman, that was an entirely different thing. A Primarch attacking another Primarch. Such a thing was practically unheard of. Indeed, violence between the legions was practically unheard of. In fact, in the way it's been spoken about in the various other books, it's not merely just something that's unheard of, it is something that legionnaires have a visceral reaction to, a disbelief, a visceral lack of understanding of what it even is, as if their minds refuse to understand and contemplate this particular possibility. There is simply no way that the Legion Astartes could ever fight one another. Indeed, in a later book, we will even meet an Ultramarine captain currently being censored because he drew up a theoretical scenario where legionnaires fought legionnaires. To boil it all down, it essentially means that an Astartes almost can't even conceive of the possibility of such a thing happening. It would be like you suddenly deciding to strangle a favored pet for no particular reason. It is an unconceivable idea to them. And yet, Argyle had his gun pointed at the nearest Ultramarine right at his throat, where the armor was at the weakest. Now that is understandable enough, it's a high-strung situation, and, well, a Primarch had just struck another Primarch. That's unusual, so having a bit of an extreme reaction to that, fair enough. Then he whispered into his comms bead that everybody should hold fire, and no one should fire unless fired upon. But then, later on, he reveals in confidence that he was secretly hoping that somebody would ignore that order. In other words, he was secretly hoping to be able to take that shot and to kill that Ultramarine. Now again, of course, these were hardly normal circumstances, and perhaps such a reaction can be excused. It is certainly understandable to a degree, but I remind you once again that the Astartes view this as an essential impossibility on a very basic, visceral level. And to have an Astartes not only be willing to, but indeed wishing to kill a brother is very unusual. And it may be another aspect of the encroaching corruption on the Wordbearers. Their original religion on the planet of Colchis was most definitively chaotic in nature, and Argyle very own chapter symbol, the serrated suns, is an 8-pointed star. And it seems unlikely to be a mere coincidence that the Legion, bearing so much in the way of chaos iconography, also appears to be the one most willing to do violence against their brothers. But at least he's still nice enough to take one last look into the ruinations of the perfect city and spot a figure bumbling about. Argyle then goes out to rescue Cyrene. An action that will have quite the consequences for his legion. And now we're gonna skip forward in time a little bit, to where Lorgar, Erebus, and Kor Phaeron are all sitting together and discussing their rebuke, their censor. And what have they learned from all of this, do you think? Have they learned that worship is not tolerated within the Imperium? That the Emperor himself rejects it, and if he truly is their god, as they claim, then his word should surely be final, no? Well, yeah, no, they none of that, really. The only conclusion they've really reached is that, yes, the Emperor is divine, but he is not necessarily worthy of worship merely for being divine. Which is an interesting idea, considering that will be, well, literally the reason why Lorgar will join Chaos. It is divine, it is the truth, and therefore it must be worshipped. And yet here and now he is refuting that very idea. And this is the kind of double and triple and quadruple think you find only in truly confused religious beliefs. What Lorgar has done here is he has simply just changed the meanings of words, yet again. His god has rejected him. And not just him, the Emperor has rejected Lorgar's entire belief system. For Lorgar believes that faith is not only important to human society, he believes that it is outright vital, a completely and utterly necessary part of human civilization. And previously, Lorgar believed that it was necessary because the Emperor was a god. There is a deity, and therefore we must worship that deity. But now that that god has rejected his worship, and in so doing shattered his entire worldview, Lorgar must now claw for some form of justification, some reason why his life has not been wasted, some reason why his civil war on Colchis was just. And the reason he arrives at is found in a quote from Lorgar. The belief that divinity deserved worship purely because it was divine. Lorgar has now rejected the idea of a god being the most important thing. The idea that worship only exists, in a religious sense at least, because there is a god. Now, Lorgar instead thinks that worship in and of itself, irrespective of what you worship, is the important thing. That faith, that is the vital thing, in and of itself. And therefore, Lorgar's life has not been wasted. His religious pursuits have not been wasted. His civil war on Colchis was not wasted. His indoctrination and enslavement of millions of people into a false religion was not wasted. It was not wrong. He simply had the incorrect god. And so, of course, the next logical step is to set out in search of the true deity, with the true part being defined by whether or not the deity will subscribe to Lorgar's idea of worship, and that it is willing to be worshipped in the way that Lorgar wishes for it to be. Nay, in the way that Lorgar needs it to be, in order to justify his life and actions up until this point. And oh boy, if Lorgar thinks he needs justification now, well, he's going to have an interesting future, that's for sure. And this was also precisely what Kor Phaeron had been waiting for. And Erebus as well. The two have clearly been in a certain level of secret consort with one another, planning for this very crisis of conscience which they clearly saw coming. For they now have quite the plan which they will set in motion to guide Lorgar down the correct path. And Lorgar appears to be, at least to some degree, to be unaware of the fact that he is being manipulated. I questioned Lorgar's perceptiveness previously, and this is why. Erebus looks at Kor Phaeron, and he sees a man that is hungry, that is driven, that is desperate for something. And considering where this story is going, we know what that something is. Power. And the kind of power that only chaos can offer. Additionally, as we see in the later books in the series, Kor Phaeron most definitively is hungry for power, far more than he is interested in helping his son. Far, far more. If anything, the well-being of his Primarch son is very much so a secondary concern, if even that, really. And yet, Lorgar states that he, and only he, can truly see Kor Phaeron for what he is. Only Lorgar can see past all that and into the paternal love that Kor Phaeron has for him. I don't know. I don't know at all. Maybe Lorgar can see something that nobody else can. Maybe Lorgar can deduce some deeper meaning to Kor Phaeron's actions, but I find it very difficult to believe. I think instead that Lorgar, having already shown a talent of simply changing what is and isn't important to suit his own needs, sees whatever Lorgar wants to see. And as for Kor Phaeron and my insinuation that he's probably thinking of chaotic power, I would go one step further. I think Kor Phaeron is already fully aware of chaos, the power it can potentially hold, and that he has been for quite some time. But to find out why, you'll have to wait through an annoying ad break, because I haven't had double ads in a video since I started Vrax, and my money sensors are tingling quite desperately, so be right back. See, that wasn't so bad, was it? In fact, I do believe that little ad break enriched your experience of this video, made you wait for it a little bit, which makes it all the sweeter when it is finally revealed why Kor Phaeron is evil. Well, first and foremost, the name, Kor Phaeron. Your mummy doesn't name you that unless she expects you to go on a genocide or two. And considering Kor Phaeron's eventual position within the Legion, I think that a fair statement. But to be a bit more specific, Kor Phaeron talks about his days on Colchis when the Emperor arrived. Lorgar describes the arrival of the Emperor as the descent of a golden god, a being of infinite mercy and benevolence, a radiant entity that immediately convinced Lorgar that yes, he had indeed been correct to believe like he did. But now, Lorgar is asking Kor Phaeron if he saw the same thing, and Kor Phaeron has quite the different story. Kor Phaeron did indeed see a god in golden armor, but he never viewed the figure as a benevolent one. In fact, not only did he not see him as a benevolent deity, merely looking upon him hurt Kor Phaeron. He felt as if his psychic aura was overpowering, as if he stank of bloodshed, of domination, and of burnt worlds already conquered. That is not only an extremely visceral reaction to seeing the Emperor, but it also appears to be a very unique one. None of the others there that day saw that side of the Emperor, and if we are to assume that Kor Phaeron is speaking the truth here, and we have no reason to not think so, considering the actions he decided to take, then the question becomes, what was different about Kor Phaeron? Well, he, unlike Lorgar, had his doubts. He moved to secure some traces of the old religion of Colchis, which was heavily inspired by chaos. And why would he do that? If he truly did believe in Lorgar's vision of a god descending from the sky, then surely there would be no need to do so. And yet, he did just that. Why? What reason could there be? Well, the reason for following Lorgar is simple. Lorgar was his adopted son. Kor Phaeron had power and influence over him, and he also could not possibly fail to recognize just how powerful Lorgar was. I mean, hell, even when he was essentially a child, he must have been able to smash grown men's skull. That kind of power is not subtle nor easy to overlook. And, well, even more so in Lorgar's case, considering he's frequently described as literally glowing with a golden light. That too is difficult to miss. But Kor Phaeron, being the consummate opportunist, still had some belief in the old faiths. And he probably also knew that there was power to be had from that religion. That is why he kept a little bit of it. And that is almost certainly why he too was just a little bit corrupted. Or perhaps that is too strong a word, corrupted. Perhaps influenced is more correct. He knew of chaos. He probably didn't know it as chaos, mind you. But he did know of it. He knew of its power, and he knew of its potential. Probably only the most basic, surface-level knowledge, but nevertheless, he knew of it. And for someone who is heading down the path of damnation, the Emperor must look like a truly horrifying sight. The single greatest threat to chaos in the entire galaxy. And that would explain why Kor Phaeron saw something so very different from everybody else who was there, as the rest of them were all die-hard converts to Lorgar's new religion. And ever since that day, Kor Phaeron has been quietly, secretly, and carefully plotting away, preparing for the return of the true faith, once Lorgar's was proven incorrect. Now, it is possible that Kor Phaeron once genuinely believed in Lorgar's faith, but that has been a very long time ago. And in this discussion, he has joined forces with Erebus. The two of them have a clear goal. They wish to present Lorgar in as positive a light as possible, to boost his self-esteem, to flatter him, to stroke his ego, and make it appear as if it was de facto his idea to attempt to resurrect the old religion. And Kor Phaeron does so in a very nifty way. I mean, to be honest here, for all of Aaron Dembski-Bowden's faults when it comes to writing the Emperor, and they are many, he is good at chaos. Kor Phaeron comes across as intelligent, sharp, well-spoken, and very, very well thought out. You know, he doesn't make an argument. He doesn't go to Lorgar like, hey, you know, your religion was stupid, mine is better. He does so very subtly. He begins by down-talking the Emperor and his brothers in a very roundabout fashion. You know, you are all facets of the Emperor. Russ is his ferocity, unrestrained by reason, and so on. Basically taking their defining characteristics, presenting them in a somewhat negative manner, whilst also talking them up a little bit, you know, making it sound as reasonable as possible, whilst also making it very clear that he's essentially diminishing them, you know, bringing them down in Lorgar's eyes. And this leads up to Guilliman. What is Guilliman then? Lorgar asks. And Kor Phaeron swoops in for the kill. Guilliman is your father in heart and soul. If everything else went wrong, he would be the one to lead the Imperium. And when Lorgar asks what part of the Imperial Avatar he is, Erebus moves in smoothly as if planned. Lorgar, you are the Emperor's hope, his belief in a better world, a brighter tomorrow. And honestly, this conversation is kind of brilliant. Erebus has denigrated Lorgar's various Primarch brothers. Very subtly so, very carefully, he has placed Lorgar aside from them, whilst setting up Erebus's comparison. And he even swoops in for the kill, and compares the Emperor to Robute Guilliman, somebody that Lorgar is not fond of at the moment. And so, since he doesn't have to denigrate Guilliman, Lorgar already hates his gut, he instead compares him with the Emperor, denigrating him as well in Lorgar's view. Honestly, it's pretty damn brilliant. Now at this point, Lorgar pretends to understand what's going on, as if he has seen through the conspiracy. I don't know if he genuinely has, because he is very accepting of what comes next. Perhaps he has simply realized that Kor Phaeron and Erebus are in league, but he has not fully unveiled their deeper motives. And in response to this, as if seeing through Lorgar calling them out, Kor Phaeron says this. History will say that if the 17th Primarch had one weakness, it was his faith in others. His selfless devotion and unbreakable loyalty caused him grief beyond the capacity of a mortal heart to contain. He trusted too easily and too deeply. Once again, Kor Phaeron has struck at the Emperor and at Lorgar's Primarch brethren, whilst also deflecting suspicion from himself. Why would somebody up to no good, somebody trying to manipulate me, point out that I trust too easily? Surely this must be the advice of a fond friend who only wants the best for me. That must be what Lorgar is thinking. And considering, again, that he stated that he can read Kor Phaeron's paternal love like no others, Kor Phaeron has done a damn good job of this, and I do not believe for a second that he actually means what he says there. Because Kor Phaeron has been working behind Lorgar's back for quite some time already, and with his plans coming to fruition, he, now having denigrated Lorgar's brothers and the Emperor, whilst also setting Lorgar aside from all of them and raising them above them via some rather brilliant oratory, he now suggests that the Emperor was a false god. For that could be the only reason why he would reject their worship. He had to be false. For faith, as he states, is the most important thing for human society. It is the source from which everything else springs: laws, traditions, and progress. This, of course, mirrors Lorgar's mind precisely. Lorgar too believes that faith should be the fundament of all human society, and that without it, it would inevitably crumble. Erebus too moves in and states that the Legion must reforge the worlds they had already conquered in the form of this new faith, and that they must also ensure that every new world conquered must also be primed to accept the new truth. But where to begin looking for it? The old ways were wiped out, right? Who could possibly guide them on this pilgrimage, an ancient Colchizian tradition? There was Magnus. They all agreed that he could possibly help, and Lorgar agreed that he would meet with them. But even then, how would they truly know if the old ways were correct or not? What would they base it upon, and where could they gain the proof they needed? And this is where Kor Phaeron drops the bombshell, revealing that he has been working at odds with Lorgar for quite some time. Whilst Lorgar was out there converting the various worlds they conquered to worship the Emperor, Kor Phaeron was sowing the seeds of destruction. He was introducing elements, aspects, and facets of the old religion onto the conquered worlds. Those where he himself had stayed behind to proselytize to the population, they were already more than ready to receive the new truth. This, however, somewhat to Kor Phaeron's surprise, does not meet with Lorgar's immediate approval, as he threatens to choke the old man to death or flat out crush his windpipe, either or much the same effect. It's interesting how quick Lorgar is to violence on occasion, though. He's so meek, or at the very least likes to see himself as meek most of the time, and yet he sent his brother flying with a blow from his Crozius. He did a number on Malkador's face. I still don't believe that Malkador is actually alive after that. I think he's a body double at this point. And here he is, choking out his father, who, by the way, despite being an enhanced human, apparently runs out of air in about 10 seconds. Lorgar's very good at choking people, I suppose. On the other hand, this is most definitively salt in a still open wound. Lorgar is struggling with the apparent failure either of his legion in worshipping the Emperor, or his failure in worshipping the Emperor in the first place, and subjecting various worlds, including Colchis, to war in the name of that faith. And now here is Kor Phaeron, his second-in-command, his foster father, saying that he has been working secretly behind Lorgar's back for all that time, Since the very day they left Colchis, Daddy has been secretly working on his own plan. Yeah, that certainly could piss someone off a wee bit. But it is an empty threat, because Lorgar needs what Kor Phaeron is selling. And once Lorgar has resigned himself to looking for the new truth, he is reinvigorated, spirited, and immediately orders Erebus to bring him pen and paper. For he, together with Kor Phaeron and Erebus, will write the new word. A new gospel fitting of the new truth. And now, we should discuss something else pertaining to this, or more correctly, Lorgar meeting the Emperor for the first time on Colchis. And I'm going to talk about it here because I seem to remember that it is brought up at a later point, but I can't be entirely sure if I remember it to be this book or one of the smaller series. The way I usually do this is that I read the book and then I listen through the audiobook whilst I'm actually making the recording. But since I was busy with Vrax, it's actually been a while since I read the book on the first Heretic. So I'm not entirely sure, which is why I'm going to talk about it here. Because there is of course a point to be made, why did the Emperor not immediately correct Lorgar when he arrived on Colchis? Why did he not immediately go, no, my son, I am not a god, I am the Emperor, and then explain to him why he was not a divine being, and, try and sort this out immediately, instead of letting this go on for as long as it did. Now, we don't know exactly how long it went on. The timeline here is messy, to put it mildly. We have an idea of how long the word-bearers have been campaigning for, but we also know that Lorgar and all of the other Primarchs spent a great deal of time on Terra, talking with both their father and one another, developing relationships, enmities in some cases, and friendships in others. And we also know that Lorgar and Magnus have had extensive discussions on the subject of divinity, the warp, magic, the mysteries, and so on before. So it's a bit difficult to determine for how long this was going on. A week, 2 weeks, months, years? It's a bit unclear. Nevertheless, the point still remains. Why did the Emperor not immediately correct him? Well, that is probably easy enough to answer, because the Emperor had just now arrived. He did not know Lorgar. In fact, the first thing he said to Lorgar was, I am the Emperor, and Lorgar went, yeah, I know, I've had visions about you. So the Emperor would then have to go, okay, so he's a psychic one, is he? How much does he know? I'll have to try and figure that out first. Does he know something I don't? Is that why he's made this strange religion thing, perhaps? And there's also the question of not trying to offend Lorgar. The Primarchs often have delicate sensibilities, shall we say. They bruise easily when their egos are concerned, and the Emperor undoubtedly knew this. And the Emperor had also dealt with his fair share of religious fanatics in his time, as we saw in, for example, The Last Church, that absolute crime against atheism. I hate that book, by the way. Absolutely fucking despise it. But that might be a topic for another video, I suppose. And so he would want to talk Lorgar out of this very carefully. He might even have assumed that, okay, well, I'm going to bring him to the Palace on Terra. I'm going to show him the Imperium. And that surely must make him realize that, oh, hey, the Emperor isn't a god, he's a man, he has built this Imperium, and what I viewed as divine power, because, again, let's bring it back to that, Lorgar's definition of the divine is power. I mean, hell, this is a savage's definition of power. To a Stone Age savage, a man with a gun must appear as if a god, And so the Emperor may simply have assumed that once he showed Lorgar the Imperium and explained the mechanisms that allowed the Imperium to function, then Lorgar would make the logical conclusion that this is indeed technology and not magic or divinity. It may seem damned optimistic with what we know now, but at the time, of course, the Emperor could not know how deep Lorgar's convictions were. Again, remember, the Emperor arrived on Colchis and saw a relatively primitive world steeped in religious belief. Religious belief that he probably recognized as chaotic as well, but that was also the very same religion that Lorgar so recently had wiped off the planet. And so he might simply have figured, again, that Lorgar attributed power to the divine because he did not know better. But on the other hand, he had known enough to wipe out the previous religion, which was clearly heretical in nature, chaotic in nature, possibly be a better word in this era. It's also possible, by the way, that the Emperor didn't notice at all, that he had no idea that there even had ever been another religion, and that was one of the reasons why he didn't simply nuke the entire planet, but I find that difficult to believe. Lorgar would have to have wiped out every mention of the religion from every text, every data scroll, the history, and he would have to make damn sure that nobody ever mentioned it around the Emperor, so that seems unlikely. And whilst the Emperor may very well have nuked a planet that was clearly chaotic in nature with the old religion, again, Lorgar had vanquished that religion, and that act in and of itself no doubt bought Lorgar a great deal of wiggle room. It almost certainly made the Emperor a little proud, I'd say. You know, here is one of his sons who instinctively recognized the danger of chaos, and without even fully understood it, took measures to eradicate it. That is precisely what the Emperor wanted. He wanted to fight chaos, but he also wanted to limit knowledge about chaos, because he knew that even knowing about chaos, even having the general knowledge that chaos was a thing that existed, that in and of itself can be a corrupting influence. And thusly, a son who did not know about chaos and yet still fought against chaos must have seemed like a dream come true to the Emperor. And so, that would explain why it took so long before he really put the foot down, so to say, and made an unmistakable example out of something Lorgar was fond of, to truly warn him off the path. Now again, it does not explain why he did so in such a unbelievably poorly thought out manner, but again, I would seriously contribute that far more to the writer in this case than I would the universe. And on that note, I will wrap up the second video. God, this is gonna take a while, isn't it? We're 2 videos in and we've mostly been discussing every single chapter in detail, but that is also because there is a lot to discuss in this book, so we're gonna be doing quite a few episodes on this. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.